Thank you, Dean Chapman. Hello, everyone. My name is Kirk Key, Associate Professor in the College of Media and Communication, and I am also the Communications Co-Chair of the Chinese Faculty and Staff Association. And it is my honor today to co-host the event with Dean Chapman. And then I know that we have a very jam-packed schedule today, so I'm going to keep my comment really brief. And it is my role right now to introduce our next speaker. I'm trying to advance on the slide here. Maybe we have a little bit of technical issue, but our next speaker is Chief Mitchell from the Lubbock Police Department, and he will offer his opening remarks. And I'm very excited to have him here today in person because he actually joined us via a video recorded introduction during the first forum. So it's very good to have him here in person with us. So please join me in welcoming Chief Mitchell.
Wasn't sure they gave me this mic, so I wasn't sure if I was supposed to stand up or stay there. Good evening, and thank you for having us. My police department and its command staff were going through some training earlier this year, and it was on race, equity, and inclusion. And one of the instructors, Dr. Brian Hodgkins, asked the question to the group, what are your blind spots? And they challenged us to start thinking about our blind spots in regards to race, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And falling on the heels of what occurred in Atlanta with the shootings and the deaths of 8 people, me and my command staff had a conversation about our communication and our contact and our relationship with our Asian community. And as we sat down as an executive command staff and started talking about how can we reach out to our Asian community to make sure that they know that we see them, we know that they're a part of our community, and we want them to know that we are here for them just as much as we are for anyone else in our community, the first forum was born. Assistant Chief John Caspel reached out to the Texas Tech University and organized that first forum. Unfortunately, like Dr. Keith indicated, I was traveling that first forum, so I had to do a video introduction. I am so happy to be here. I am so happy to be involved in such an important topic to understand that everyone that makes up our community is important to our police department. We want you to feel safe. We want you to feel welcome. We want you to know that we are here for you as much as we are for anyone else. We want you to know that we want to continue this conversation, build our relationships, and bring you into our police department. One of the things that I always do at these type of meetings is recruit. We don't have any Asian American police officers on our police department. This is a great police department. It is a great opportunity. It's a great career. I've been doing it for over 30 years. You have a very good police department. Our city council and city manager has increased the pay substantially in this budget year. So we are always looking for you to be included, and there's no better way for you to come to be part of our family but to join it. We also have a civilian, and I'm going to say this wrong, you have to help me, a civilian police academy. Citizens Police Academy. It's something different at each police department. And we weren't able to hold it last year because of COVID, but this year we're working to put that on again. That way you don't have to become a police officer and ride at 12 o'clock at night, but you can understand what this job entails and how we work for everyone in our community. I'm so excited to be here tonight and be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Hong Zhang. He is the president of the Chinese Faculty and Staff Association, who's also been just wonderful and supportive and a great partner. And we're going to have even more partnerships coming up. I'll be beating down your door in a good way. So I'm going to introduce him as he'd like to say a few words as well.
Thank you very much, Dean Chapman. And first of all, I'd like to thank Dean Nowling and Chapman for organizing this event this evening here, for hosting this here. And without the support, we wouldn't be able to have this face-to-face meeting tonight. And I also like to thank the two organizers tonight. Again, Sophia Chapman and Kurt Key. And they too organized this wonderful program, put up this wonderful program here. So thank you very much. And also I'd like to thank the panel member here, distinguished guys here. They are going to be here to answer questions, and they represent a different aspect of Lubbock communities. And hopefully they're going to provide a wonderful discussion here. And again, I'd like to thank the President Lawrence Skivlik and Vice President Carol Sumner. They are always there whenever we need help. Always. Thank you for your great leadership. And finally, I'd like to thank all the people who are physically showing up here tonight, and also people online. So let's work together to build a community that is better. And let's work together, make this community a great place to live, to work, to study. And let's make Texas Tech the best university in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang. And now I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Yuan Shu. Dr. Shu is, let me just double check that. Okay, the keyboard is working. I was just making sure that he will be able to drive his PowerPoint presentation. Dr. Shu is Associate Professor of English and also the Director of Asian Studies Program here at Texas Tech University. And I'd like to also note that he was the founding President of the Chinese Faculty and Staff Association here at Texas Tech. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Shu for his very big topic for his talk, a brief history of Asian Americans in a very short period of time of about 10 to 13 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Down.
All right, so I talk about Asian American history in a matter of about 10 minutes, all right? So the first question is, who are Asian Americans? Well, Asian Americans, first as a term, is a political construction formed during the civil rights movement in the 1960s, late 1960s on the West Coast, specifically in California. So they are unified, the term, it's a political construction, and it was formed when first formulated, it specifically designate East Asians, all right? By East Asians, I mean here, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, and to this extent also like Filipinos at that time, all right? And as the term evolved, and then gradually it incorporate Southeast Asian Americans, all right? So specifically because of the Vietnam War, at the end of the Vietnam War in 1975, and with the coming of war refugees, Vietnamese, Cambodians, and the Laotians, when they came as refugees, and also in the 1980s, when the so-called boat people came to the United States, and then they also became part of joining this, this group of Asian Americans, all right? And of course, gradually, one thing, I may not have time, but I mean, a Vietnamese comedian joked about the term boat people, because he said when the founding fathers, when they came to this country, did they come here with passports, with visas? And of course not. So why they were called founding fathers and we were called boat people? I mean, it's a joke. I like the comedian making a joke of their own experiences, And then in the 1990s and early 21st century, South Asians also joined Asian Americans, so they expanded to include them as well. And so here, a little bit about issues, right? So the Asian Americans were united only to the extent that, well, they share. Asian Americans come from different countries originally. They have different languages, different cultures, different religions. Unlike Latinx, they share the language, right? Spanish. They also share religion, Catholicism. But for Asian Americans, they don't share the same language. They don't share the same religion. They don't share the same culture. They have a different history. So it's a just construction in that sense, okay? Then the question is, what's so different, or what is the challenge, and what are the issues for Asian Americans? The issue is, first, the issue is how to insert Asian American experience into the grand narrative of American experience, American history, to speak, right? So Roger Daniel, a historian, made these observations. He states that Asian Americans look at American history the wrong way, right? The grand narratives, like from east coast to the west. It's not from Asia Pacific to the west coast and from west coast to the east coast. So they look at American history, quote unquote, the wrong way, right? Because according to historians such as Frederick Jackson Turner, who famously proposed the frontier hypothesis in 1893, he literally saying like the East Coast is the European frontier, okay? So only by westward expansion, westward movement, that defines American history. And of course, the vision of Thomas Jefferson back then was a passage to India, right? So for the three countries, Asian countries, China, Japan, and India, they have different issues. For Chinese, they came to this country. I will mention why and how did they come to this country, right? So for Chinese and the Filipinos, they came here in the 1600s, so in the 17th century, and reached Mexico on the Manila galleons, okay? According to historian Evelyn Huda-Hart at Brown University, she argues that the founding of the colony in the Philippines were actually Spaniards in Mexico also joined that. So she called them Mexicans. So there is connection back in the 17th century, before the founding of the United States of America. So that's to say that the Filipinos, Chinese, reached Mexico on the Manila galleons, in the 17th century. And then U.S.-Japan first treaty signed in 1854, and the U.S.-Korean treaty first signed in 1882, and then South Asian, So I guess I move on. I hope I have enough time to cover. And of course, United States, even though like it's the wrong way to go from West Coast to East Coast, but the connection between the United States and East Asia can date back before the founding of the Republic. People probably have heard of like a Boston Tea Party, right? Can you guess where the tea come from? The tea were actually Chinese tea, came from China, okay? So back in the 18th century, back in the 19th century, for any family in New England, if they own like a porcelain dinner set or porcelain like a tea set, they all imported from Guangdong, Canton, China, and also like a demand of silk and tea. So there was trade even before the founding of the Republic in 1776. So it was like a Tea Party was around 1773, so way before that, So that's really sort of connection. And of course, Thomas Jefferson's vision was a passage to India to establish trade relationships with China. And so India has always been misnamed for things. Indigenous Native Americans were not Indians, but they misnamed as Indians. And then a passage to establish connection with East Asia, Japan, China, but it's called a passage to India. So you can see that history always messed up in many different ways, So here's something about I cannot go in great detail, but for Japanese Americans experience, Japanese came to this country for different reasons, Japanese, this immigration mostly for settlement, okay. They had a settlement in northern China, Manchuria, and then they had a settlement like in Brazil. So they came here as independent farmers, and they stayed here to do farming work before there was like a restriction on their coming, all right? So you can see that typically they were small farmers on the West Coast. And of course, the worst experience for Japanese Americans, the internment experience during the Second World War. They were interned in many camps on the West Coast, the so-called Pacific states. So in Texas, there is one near San Antonio, the internment camp. All right. For Koreans, Koreans came to this country not on a massive scale. Most initially for to promote their independence under the Japanese colony. Okay, as a Japanese colony to fight against Japanese, the intellectuals of Korea, they went to China. They came to the United States in order to fight for independence. All right. So I'm not going to the details about. Of course, after the Korean War, they probably more Koreans came after that. And of course nowadays the Koreans probably more known for K-pop and other pop culture. And the Filipinos, Filipino, of course, make a long story short, after the Spanish-American War, Philippines was ceded to the United States, right? And then there's Philippine-American War and independence, but deliberately, on July 4th, 1964, to coincide with American Independence Day. And Filipinos mostly were very, very active in health industry. And at some point, I mean, Philippines is the only country in Asia that identifies with Hispanic or Latino, whatever you call that, because they could speak Spanish, and it's a Catholic country. And you'll be surprised if you visit Manila and see like a Casa Manila, and you hear people like the last name Rodriguez and all these names. Initially you think, oh, and then you realize, oh, okay, because of a Spanish heritage. And the Vietnamese American experience. Okay, I've already mentioned. I specifically put this person here, Viet Thanh Nguyen. I brought him to campus as a keynote for comparative literature in 2008. And actually 2016, I had a panel at American Studies Association. That was a month before he received the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, So he's now big, So he's a very, very good scholar and also a writer. So here a little bit about Chinese experience. I don't know if how much time I have, but I mean, they came here probably among the earliest. Why did they come? Because first of all, back in the early 19th century, for centuries, China was like in terms of GDP, it had like a 40% of the 20 to 30% of the world global GDP. So it was a wealthy country to some extent, but it was still an agrarian society. In other words, its military was extremely weak, So when the British later, because of trade dispute, trade war with Britain, United Kingdom can use like a few thousand soldiers armed with firearms, and the Chinese was used like all these knives or whatever to fight the British. Of course, they lost the first Opium War in 1840, and then other European powers launched other wars against China. So for a time, Chinese government had to pay these countries. That was the equivalent of 10 years of their government revenues, So in other words, the government was bankrupt at that time. So people in Guangdong province and in Fujian province, in the coastal areas, they had to flee the country to make a living. So that's the reason for their came to America. So in 1848, gold rush, Chinese came. And then in 1850, 20,000 Chinese came. And of course, in 1865, that was a Central Pacific Railroad Corporation recruit the workers from China, for the railroad, So that was a massive scale, brought in a lot of labor, And of course, Chinese exclusion law, 1882, and 1943, Congress repeals all the exclusion laws against the Chinese. Of course, since 1965, new immigration law allowed more Asians, including Chinese, come to this country. So just give you some glimpse of transcontinental railroad, the range and the scope and the type of work were involved. And this is actually workers in action. I was particularly interested in this photo because, I mean, according to history books, they always say like Cantonese is really short, in the 5 feet. When I got this picture, I was thinking that, well, this worker here, looks like more than 5 feet to me, and actually equivalent, maybe taller than this Caucasian foreman next to him, right? I thought he's actually pretty strong and tall. And all these people standing here seem to me like pretty tall, So I read a lot, and so I want to verify, and this photo really convinced me to some extent, I don't have I cannot really cover everything, but here are just a collage, collection of better known Asian Americans and the contribution to this country, in all kinds of fields, in architecture, in entertainment. Fortunately, we have somebody who actually plays basketball, Even so, we have Jeremy Lin, and we have Viet Thanh Nguyen, we have Steve Cho talking to President Obama, and we have Michelle Yeoh from Malaysia. And so we have, and then here's a Filipino rapper. So you can see that Asian Americans are active in all the fields, I cannot go into detail. So to me, here are the issues, if I have little time left, here are the issues, because Asian Americans are united precisely on the ground that they share similar experience of institutional racism and racism on a daily basis. So that really united Asians, all Americans of Asian descent, So here are a couple of issues that continue to Asian Americans have to deal with. One is the issue of perpetual foreigner to the model minority, right? So here I use this photo here with who killed Vincent Chin. Chin was a Chinese American, right? And in Detroit at a bar before he was to get married in a couple of days, and then a Caucasian worker identified him as Japanese, and they got into a fight, and of course the two guys used baseball bats and killed him, and mistaking for the Japanese and calling him because of the Japs we lost our jobs, as auto workers in Detroit. So he was killed in 1982, and this sparked movements, Asian American demonstrations all over the country. Of course, you continue to see this model minority myth. Oh yeah, Asian kids doing really good at math and all these other things, So positive stereotypes, negative stereotypes, positive include all good at math, whether it's true or not, or sometimes a mutual or neutral, or, so you have all kinds of stereotypes. All Asian guys know Kung Fu, or, Asians cannot drive. And so you have all kinds of issues. Asians cannot play basketball, and, so you have all kinds of stereotypes that Asian Americans have to continue to fight. But my interest is actually more interested in, these two tropes that has been historically associated with Chinese Americans. One is cheap labor, and the other is what I call, the paradigm shifting representation from cheap labor to high-tech spies. So we have in 19th century, I cannot get into detail, about this cheap labor issue. It was basically theorized by this 19th century economist, Henry George, talks about the danger of Chinese labor, specifically lay the theoretical foundation for the Chinese exclusion. And today we have the China Initiative, and this here is Dr. Xiaoxin Xi, and who was the chair of physics at Temple University. He was identified as a spy, and was about 10 FBI agents surrounded his house and arrested him in front of his his wife and 2 kids, and he was devastated by that, and he was charged. And later he was quit. I mean, it failed. It quitted, and so he's free, and fortunately he's able to go back to teach at his institution. So these are the issues that continue to trouble, and of course hate crime and COVID-19. That's what we're doing, what we're discussing here. And so these are the issues, and that Asian Americans have to struggle, have to continue to fight for. So that's my 10 minutes. I hope I did not exceed too much time. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Let's give another round of applause to Dr. Xu. That was just phenomenal. And I could have continued. I was like, keep going. It was wonderful. It was great. So we need to do coffee soon, if that's okay. I just thought it was wonderful and so enlightening. What I'd like to do next is I will serve as your moderator for this evening's panel. And just so that we can, in the interest of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each panelist, and I'll start here with Neil Barron, to introduce, if you'll introduce who you are, what organization you're with. And the focus of tonight's discussion is allyship. And allyship is something that is so central to many of us in our community. It's very important to our students here at the Texas Tech University School of Law. It's important to me as a woman, as a person of color, as a professional. Allyship is something where even me, when I practice allyship, I'm constantly making sure that I am aware and that I perhaps need to understand maybe some behaviors, things that I need to unlearn or learn or do better. And so with that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to the panel. So if you will start with a brief introduction of yourself, and then if you will give a brief definition in terms of what you think allyships from your standpoint for about 10 to 15 seconds. All right? Okay.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for having us. It's our pleasure to be in front of you tonight, and we enjoy communicating with every segment of our public here in Lubbock. My name is Neil Barron. I'm one of the assistant chiefs at the Lubbock Police Department, and I am with the Investigations Bureau. So we handle every investigation that is initiated by our patrol officers that respond to calls for service that come in from our public. That ranges from everything for Class C misdemeanor theft all the way to homicide. So we cover a gambit there. And that leads me into why allyship is important to us. From an investigations standpoint, we have to have a good relationship with those that we serve in our communities so that we are able to gain information on crimes that have occurred and put that information together to be able to solve the crimes and put those responsible in jail if need be.
Testing, testing.
Yeah,
Testing, testing.
there it goes.
Hi, my name is Shruti Gopal Krishnan. I'm a second year at the law school, and I'm representing APALSA, which is the Asian Pacific American Law Student Association, as well as Outlaw, which is the LGBTQ plus org at the law school. And allyship to me is two parts. You know, it's learning about marginalized group struggles like we did today and advocating for their rights in public spaces, like when you go vote. But also it's going beyond that and actively deconstructing those systems in your private spaces. So having uncomfortable conversations with your friends and family and practicing bystander intervention, et cetera.
Hi, my name is Dina Jeffries, and I'm the CEO of the South Plains Food Bank. And I know some of you guys are saying, boy, she looks a lot smarter than that, but I really do have a passion for leading service. So I'm blessed to be where I'm at. Allyship to me means that you become a lifelong learner, that you are willing to actively listen and be engaged in understanding. And through that, we build trust. And through that, we build better communities.
Once again, I'm Floyd Mitchell, of the Chief of Police of the Lubbock Police Department. And to me, building allyship is some of what we've heard before. It's building that relationship on the most fundamental basis. Building a friendship with one or two people in this room. Having the conversation, being able to go out and have a cup of coffee or a meal together, to where you build a relationship, to where you build that trust, to where you can have those conversations, conversations that you wouldn't normally have because you don't know that person. And once you spend time with that person, you build that bond to where you feel you have a safe space to build to ask those questions. So to me, that's what building allyship is.
Hi, I'm Wendy Ross. I am a professor here at the law school, and also I'm one of the directors of diversity here at the law school, and I teach. One of the classes that I teach here is race and racism. And so allyship means a lot of things to me. I feel that as a part of an ally, that means we are empowering groups who typically don't have a voice. We're giving them voice and also educating ourselves and others about, just their culture and helping them feel as a part of our community. So I define allyship pretty broadly.
Hello, I am Jackie Song, professor at Lars College of Business Administration, the former president of Korean Faculty Association. Simply, I view allyship as working with others who have common goals. So I view this allyship as a mechanism, can be used individual to become collaborator who can promote equity through personal relationships.
Hi, I'm Elisa Wong. I'm the interim dean of the Honors College and a professor of history and a professor of honors. And they put there that I'm the co-founder of the Asian American Pacific Islander Faculty, Staff, and Student Association. But that's really giving me too much credit because Dee Nguyen, Kirk Key, and Stephen Chow are really the people who put all the energy in it. I was just along for the ride. So I want to make sure that they get the credit that they are due because they are the true founders of that organization. To me, allyship as an educator is the protection of academic freedoms and the protection of access and opportunity for all peoples to be able to express their opinions, to express their viewpoints, to express their perspectives in an intellectual, evidenced fashion. And it is our job as educators to ensure that all those voices can be heard, that all those voices who are not been at the forefront can be brought to the forefront, and that we give the time and the space in order for those people to be seen, heard, and to understand that they belong.
Thank you so very much. Just wonderful definitions of allyship. And, even for me, allyship again is that opportunity to be heard and to have not only a voice, but a seat at the table. And I want to talk to you about a really quick story I had. This summer, I serve as the chair for the President's Gender Equity Council. So I had a chance to meet with President Skubinik in his office. And I called my mama the night before. I said, Mama, I need you to light a candle because I've never met with the president of university before. She's like, Mija, I'm so proud of you. She's like, tell me all about it. And the fact that I got to do that, we have a president that practices allyship. It's just outstanding. And then Mama called me later and she's like, I knew you knocked it out. You could knock it out of the park. And it was just wonderful. I said, yeah, but I tried to sit in his seat, Mom. It was quite funny. But he was like, it's totally fine, Sophia. And so it was wonderful. So when I think of allyship, let's dig a bit further, if you will. Why? Why does allyship matter? What is the role of allyship in combating anti-AAPI hate crimes? So I'm going to turn it over to you first, Neil.
Okay. Thank you. So like I mentioned in my definition of allyship, it's very important for us to have the trust and a relationship, an ongoing relationship with the communities that we serve. And it was mentioned in the first forum, it was put very well. I can't remember which speaker talked about it, but we talked about that unless someone feels comfortable calling the police, regardless of their background, where they came from, what color their skin is, then we can't help that person solve whatever problem that they're experiencing. So it's very important for us as a police department to be out in the communities that we serve and build those relationships so that everyone that we come across is comfortable when we're around and they're comfortable picking up their phone and calling 911 and having a policeman respond and help them through whatever process they're experiencing.
Thank you. Trudy?
So allyship matters because knowing that you're safe in a space where people don't look like you is essential. And in the context of hate crimes, allyship can literally mean life or death in certain situations. So that's why, like today, I'm definitely going to emphasize the importance of bystander intervention because, I'm not sure if you guys have had bystander intervention training, but there are 6 strategies. And something as simple as distracting someone, asking, hey, what are the eggs in the aisle of the grocery store? That can literally save someone from real harm.
Allyship matters because everyone has a right to their voice and their opinion. When you understand another person's perspective or point of view or their life experience, then it enhances your own experience, your own life. And I think that just makes a happier, more productive work environment, home life, and you can take that throughout.
For me, it's about building your network. Me sitting here watching Assistant Chief Barron over there talk about the investigations and what his bureau does in regards to our community and helping them solve crimes is rewarding, because I am an ally to Neil. I want him and I want all of my assistant chiefs and I want all of my police officers to do well. When I first got to meet Dr. Skovnik, when I first got to meet the coaches here and some of the faculty here and be involved in some of the events going on here, my goal is to, one, extend my influence to them to say, if you need something from me that I can help you with, I am your ally. And that's what we're here to do today. We were in this training scenario and we realized that we had a blind spot and we needed to fix that blind spot. We want to be your ally, whether it's here in a professional setting or if something happens to you and you become a victim of a crime. We want you to know that we are here for you and we will listen to you and we will take you seriously. The other thing about allyship is you have things that happen in your own culture that we don't know anything about. And we want to learn about what's going on in your culture. There's things that are good going on in your culture and there's things that are negative going on in your culture. And maybe we can help, but maybe you're afraid to come and talk to us because it's within your own culture. But if we are not your ally, you don't trust us to do that. So my goal is for you to trust us to do that. We're going to do the right thing in every scenario. So that's what it means to me.
I think allyship matters because it makes a difference with our society. And one of the things I like about Texas Tech in the last several years is that we have been intentional about allyship and about making people have a voice and listening to people and making people feel like they're not invisible. And so allyship matters because, I mean, we're not an island in it. We are all interconnected. What affects my colleague affects me. And so we have made, really a strong pitch, especially here at the law school, here at Texas Tech, about not letting people feel like they're disenfranchised, like they don't have a voice, like they don't matter. And so, I just say, we have, really come a long ways, and just lots of kudos in that, the intentionality and the effort that's gone towards that. And I think that makes a difference. I mean, I can, just tell the difference in being a professor here, how students have changed over the years. And now they're not so afraid to be here. They're not so afraid that, they come here and they don't matter. And they can go out and say, yes, I learned a lot at Texas Tech and I had a good experience.
Allyship is matter practical point, particularly in this context. There are many groups are frequently isolated from each others. So particularly groups that are targeted, they may feel that no one cares about their issues. They cannot get help. They feel powerless and distant. So this allyship particularly may become an antidote to isolation for people who felt targeted. So this allyship particularly empowers everyone involved.
I think in this particular case with Asian Americans and with anti-AAPI hate is that Asian Americans, especially East Asian Americans, so people of Japanese, Korean, and Chinese descent, have often been stereotyped as the model minority. They are often invisible. They are the good citizens, the good immigrants, right? And set in opposition to other groups. And so in particular, in this case with anti-AAPI violence, it is almost as though that violence is easier. If you take a look at especially the women who have been attacked or the senior citizens who were attacked, they were the most vulnerable. They were the ones who had the least access to protections. They were the people who who seemed that they were the most helpless. And so allyship is not just about, it's definitely about being comfortable. It's definitely about building trust and building confidence, but it's also about those people who have been stereotyped, who have been mislabeled, who have been misrepresented. And I'm not just talking about the victims, I'm also talking about when you look at the media, when you saw the people who were attacking those Asian American women and those Asian American senior citizens, almost always the people they depicted were African American. When you take a look at the statistics as to who was perpetrating Asian American violence, it was overwhelmingly white. And so allyship is not just about protecting the victims, it's about protecting all of the people who are involved in that very connected, complex, complicated system of power. And so when we're talking about allyship, you know, those of you who know me on campus, I'm not someone who needs someone to step in between me and the problem, right? Most of the time, when there is an issue, I think that President Skuvanek's like, oh, don't put Elisa in. No, please don't, please leave Elisa out of this, right? I'm not someone who needs someone to step in for me. But I will tell you that when I have been at my most vulnerable, when I have been not prepared for those types of conflicts, when someone else has stepped in for me, it is not just about protecting me from the perpetrator. It is about giving me the power to know that I don't have to fight this by myself. That I can, at my moment, at my most vulnerable, at my weakest, also take a step back and know that someone else has my back. So allyship is not just about the protection of someone from a crime, and absolutely it is part of that, but it's also making sure that the person who has been taking on those very tiring, relentless systems can say, I need a break right now. And Wendy's going to come in for me. Jackie's going to come in for me. The chief of police is going to come in for me. Dr. Sumner is going to come in for me. And someone else is going to step in and say, I'm going to carry you for just a little bit until you can stand up on your own. That's the importance of allyship to me. And especially in this case with anti-AAPI violence.
Thank you so much. And, you know, you talked about someone having your back and, you know, and I think that's the other thing is my own personal story with allyship with my own husband. My husband and I come from very different worlds. He is a white male. He is a Marine veteran. And when we first met, I mean, we have very different types of views in certain things. The thing they had in common were the Red Raiders. So that's why we had our wedding reception here on campus at the football stadium. But he has my back. He's my ally. And I have days where I may be down or I'm like, I can't do this, or I'm like, and he will recite my dissertation to me. And I wrote my dissertation on women of color, completing the terminal degree. You can read it, it's really cool. And he will talk to me and he will tell me, you got this, Sophia. He wasn't able to be here tonight because he had to go do something with our son. But right before this, he texted me, and some of my students know this, our nickname, or he calls me Boo Boo Kitty. I'll call him Boo Boo Kitty. It's our thing. And he texts me, he goes, you got this, Boo Boo Kitty. And so I think it talks about also having your back. When we talk about those allies also, who are the allies in combating anti-AAPI hate crimes? So it's kind of a two-part, if you will. Why are these people and or groups, and why are they important to helping in terms of with allyship and combating hate crimes?
So some of our most important allies are the people I'm looking at right now, the leaders of our community and the informal leaders of our community that help make the liaisons between the police department and our society at large. And that's why it's very important for us to build the trust with those leaders and informal leaders so that when hard times come, they can help make the inroads between the police department and the society at large to kind of bridge the gap of trust and let us work to build that relationship and that allyship between the police department and whatever neighborhood, whatever community that we are trying to solve the problem for. In this case, it's the Asian violence. So we want to develop those inroads through the leaders that are here in this room to help us reach more people of the community that we wouldn't normally have access to.
So this is kind of nuanced because technically everyone should be an ally. It doesn't really matter what community you're part of. Like for me, for example, like I'm part of the AAPI community, I'm Indian American, but I'm not part of the group that's being targeted by these specific hate crimes. So I have to do my best to be a good ally and continue learning and support, my friends. But at the same time, like if you are not part of that community, like the chief was saying, if you don't understand the culture, the onus is on you to learn. There's so many resources online to where you can learn about a group's issues without them having to teach you, because that can be extremely tiresome. Some groups have to see, their friends and family being brutalized online, and that can just be so exhausting. So I think when you're not part of the culture, you should be even more engaged and really, take power in learning and how to help those communities that are being marginalized.
I think we have to empower the bystander. I think you have to know your resources and encourage, if someone is in trouble or you witness trouble, know the signs that there might be trouble, and be willing to speak up. And I think that when you are blessed to explore a different culture, a different way, a different perspective, then you have a choice. You can keep that to yourself, or you can take it to your own circles of influence and help educate others. So I think it's really up to the people in this room. It's a mindset that I think we have to overcome, that the older generation, they're set in their ways and they're never going to change. You never know. It's also us educating the youth, making sure that we talk about this to the very young, because I tell you, those youngsters get it. Kids get caring for kids. And a lot of times, that's who I think we all draw our inspiration from.
When you look at what's going on across the nation, and then you drill it down to what's going on locally here, we have not had any Asian hate crime reported since 2017. That's not to say that we haven't had crime against our Asian community. But even when you look at our crime against our Asian community, and you follow the data and you look at historically how things happen in each culture or each race, and it doesn't deviate even with our Asian community. When you look at our victim population in our Asian community, the perpetrator or the suspect, by and large, are other Asian people. And it follows the same path with African American. We are victimized most often by someone inside of our own race or culture. So one of the things that I think is important from an allyship standpoint is building those relationships to make sure that our female Asian population understands that there are resources out there for them if they're being victimized by someone within their own culture. Building those relationships so they understand that if someone outside of their culture, outside of their race is victimizing them, we are there for them. So it goes deep into understanding crime and the mindset of the criminal and how we are victimizing each other. And then what we can do as a law enforcement agency to make you feel welcome and safe so we can help you out of that situation. When we look at our crime data for Lubbock, Texas, we don't have a reported big issue here in regards to Asian hate crime, but we know what's going on around the United States, and we know it can creep into our society. But when you look at what happened to us last year in regards to our violent crime rate here, a lot of it has to do with domestic violence. So that's what concerns me about when you look at our Asian victims here and the Asian perpetrators here, making sure that our community understands that we can help you out of some of those situations, but we have to know. And if we are not part of that culture, it's difficult for us to get into it to understand and then provide you those resources. So again, part of this is letting you know that we are there for you in many ways, and it doesn't have to be hate crime. It can be any crime.
Yeah, I think it's in allies for everyone. It's all of our responsibilities. And so I always say in my, race and racism class that oftentimes we can go back and, to our own groups and where things are being said, things are being talked about, and sometimes, educate those people, our loved ones, our family, our friends, as to other cultures. And so oftentimes we're having these private conversations, and these conversations are because people are miseducated. And so as we get educated, as we go about with our family and our friends and our circle, we can help advocate and help educate our colleagues, our friends, our family as to some of these misconceptions. So oftentimes these misconceptions are things that, fuel these hate crimes. And a lot of times it's because they have one idea about a certain group of people that may, that's really, misguided. And so I think as allies, it's our jobs to get educated. It's our jobs to get informed so we can go back. And sometimes we can have those conversations that you will not have in public. People will dare not speak in public, but we can come back and have those private discussions and educate our friends and our family about, no, really that's not true. That's a myth. They don't really do that. That's not really about that. That's not their culture. And so we can do a lot just by going back to our own circle of friends and educating them by getting ourselves educated.
Yeah, as Aliza mentioned, allies not only just help her, but also have a common interest, creating like connections. So, like me, immigrant, allies can provide the valuable input to individuals or group who may not have a power to or influence change, systematic changes.
So I think, this is a difficult question about, where do Asian American Pacific Islanders find their allies? Because I think that, going back to something that Mr. Rogers said, right? You look for the helpers everywhere, right? It's not one particular group. It's not how one particular person looks. It's not how one particular person feels, right? You can find your allies everywhere, right? And especially at a university, I think that a lot of our allies are scholars. They're the people who are on the front lines doing research, complicating the problem, using evidence, using data, and really bringing to the forefront what we understand from an intellectual perspective about race and privilege and power and belonging and identity. And so I think that we have to look for our allies everywhere. I found allies here at Texas Tech that I never expected to find, right? When there was the Atlanta shooting, I had students of all different races, all different identities, all different sexualities, all different socioeconomic statuses who were emailing me and texting me and saying, Elise, I just want you to know, I see you, right? I'm here for you. Are you okay, right? Kent Wilkinson, who's sitting back there, has been my partner in crime for near on a decade, I think. And he is the director of the Thomas J. Harris Center for Hispanic and International Communication. And he and I think, have been rolling up our sleeves and moving furniture around and feeding people, doing open teaching concept and bringing diversity into the classroom and into our intellectual spaces. Did I think that the person I was going to be allied with was a fellow CU grad who has been, helping me with a number of different things? Not necessarily. You know what I mean? But we find our allies where we find our friends. And so, I was at a Raider Roadshow last year, and 2 years ago because of COVID, I forgot about that. And my flight got canceled. It was a Sunday night, and they said that I wouldn't be able to get home until Thursday. My son was at home alone because my husband was at a conference in Europe, and I was like, I can't leave my son at home alone forever. I'm gonna rent a car and I'm gonna drive back home from Houston. And I think Carol Sumner and I had known each other for maybe 3 months. And she said, ain't no way in hell you're driving home by yourself from Houston, right? She got in a car with me and we took an 8-hour ride on the back roads of Texas, right? And she promised me she wouldn't take more than a sip of water every 15 minutes so that we wouldn't have to stop at any gas stations along the way. And we drove from midnight till 8 a.m. You find your allies where you look for them and where you least expect them. So don't necessarily just look where you think you will find them. It can just be, I mean, allyship is built on, have you walked across campus and seen an African-American student who is not looking up at you and caught their eye and just said, hey, I see you, give them a nod? Have you, when you've seen one of your food service workers who serves the food, oftentimes, like, you know, and we joke about this, because the food servers like at top tier, oftentimes like the only people of color are me and the servers at top tier. Have you ever thanked your top tier server and said, I see you, right? My aunt was you, my mom was you. Allyship isn't just in being the bystander. Absolutely, you have to be the bystander and find your ways to intervene. But being an ally is also just making sure that people hear you and see you in the littlest of ways. And so look for the helpers everywhere, because they're everywhere on this campus.
Thank you so very much. That was just fabulous. It is already 8 o'clock, but I do want to go ahead and set aside some time for some questions, if that's okay. So I think we'll end at 8:10, but if you have to leave, that is not a problem. But people in Zoom land, we're going to stay on for a little bit longer. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions from the audience. So yes, hi, Stephen, how are you? Let's see, let me see if I can borrow a mic. I don't know, let me see if I can share one.
You can just press the button in front of you and hold it
Oh
down.
yeah,
to
press the
talk.
button. I forgot about that. Cool technology, sorry.
Is this the button? Is
Yeah.
it working?
Press and talk. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, thank you all for being part of this panel. I'm really excited about this conversation. But frankly, I just want to say I am very bothered by the framing of this panel through allyship, through this sense of carceral allyship. I'm bothered by this conversation about carceral allyship when we're in a city in which, according to LPD data, Black community members are stopped at 14% of traffic stops, even though they only consist of about 8% of our community. I'm bothered about this conversation about carceral allyship when we have a police department that has a budget of $78 million and when our community of development budget, which goes about housing, is less than 10 million. Our cultural and recreation services budget is about 17 million. And our public health budget is about $2 million. And so are we addressing the root problems of our community safety? And so in light of that, in light of my being very bothered with this framing of allyship as exposing some of our community members to greater carceral systems, I just want to ask, how can we address anti-Asian hate in more systemic ways rather than using policing and punishment as the main recourse? And I thank Ms. Gopalakrishnan and Aliza, of course, for already bringing up some of those conversation points.
Is it directed to a specific panel member?
It can be directed to anyone. Thank
I'll
you.
jump in.
Okay.
Okay. You know, one of the things that we are required to do by state law is report our traffic stops. These are any time that we come into contact with anyone out there and we stop them in regards to a traffic violation, a pedestrian check, or a car check. And we report that data to the state, and the state reports it to the federal government. When you look at the African-American population here in Lubbock, it's about 8%, fluctuates a little bit between 8.5% and 9%. The Hispanic population is right about 34 to 37%. And then you have a very small population of Asian Americans, and you have mostly white. When you look at our crime and our crime areas, we will tell you that most of our victims from homicide and aggravated assault and robberies are people of color, Black and brown. I was at a meeting just yesterday of the East Side Coalition, and we were having a discussion, our second discussion, about what type of programs we need to get together, not just as a police department, but as a community to address our Black and brown violent crime. One of the things that I think is important is making sure we are not over-policing our Black and brown communities. However, as I spoke to just earlier about we victimize our own, when you look at the crime data, we have to put law enforcement officers in some of these neighborhoods where the crime is occurring. So when I deploy my police officers, I deploy them in such a way to where we can have an impact on that violent crime. We were talking, like I say, earlier this week about, we just had a shooting in Booker T. Washington Park, and we're going to move our observation tower over to Booker T. Washington Park to address some of these crime issues. When you look at the homicides, when you look at the aggravated assaults, when you look at the drive-by shootings, if I did not put my resources over there, that community would be screaming that, hey, crime is going off the charts over here and I don't have any resources over there. Sometimes that affects the percentage of stops. But when you look at Lubbock as a whole, and my numbers aren't going to be exact right off my head because I don't have them right off my head, but I think we made somewhere between 16 and 18,000 stops last year, and it was a COVID year. That's down probably about 10,000. Of those stops, by far the majority of those stops are Caucasian, because that is the largest portion of race here in Lubbock. The second one is Hispanic. When you look at, and I'm talking about the number, not the percentage, but when you look at our crime data, the number of African-American victims and the number of Hispanic victims far outpaces our Caucasian victims. I am a data-driven police chief. I put my people where they belong. I put them where the crime is occurring to try to deter that crime. And Assistant Chief Barron will tell you, when we put our resources in these areas, you can see the hotspot map move. It moves every month because we are stopping crime, but we also are moving that crime to different areas because they know that we're there. So that's part of it. I look at that data and I break it down to make sure, are we stopping people without probable cause? Are we disenfranchising people? And I will tell you, when the 2 years that I've been here and looking at the data, it doesn't support that. What it supports is putting our people where the crime is. So I completely understand what you're saying, but I can tell you, if I believe we were racially profiling someone, I would be the first to stop it. All of our stops, and forgive me, I don't know the year that the Lubbock Police Department went to body-worn cameras and in-car cameras. One of my assistant chiefs would know that. But every stop is recorded with a body-worn camera and an in-car camera. If you feel like anyone in this room or anyone listening on Zoom, if you feel like that you have been mistreated by a Lubbock police officer, it's on camera. We're going to be able to look at it. And if they violated policy, we will address that. And that's one of the things that I am very proud about this police department, that if you violate policy, one of my assistant chiefs or I are going to discipline you for it, because all of our stops are on video camera. So we are not worried about the people standing on the sidewalk with their video cameras reporting it, because we are too. And if we are violating policy, we're going to address it.
Chief, I'll jump in and add a little bit to that. When we deploy to an area of our city that's affected by a certain crime top, we look at those that have historically been involved in that crime top. Who are the suspects that are committing the vehicle burglaries in North Lubbock or South Lubbock, or the robbery suspects in East Lubbock? And we try to look for individuals that are involved in that specific crime type. So when we deploy to a neighborhood, we share that intelligence with not only our specialized units like the gang unit and the vice unit and things like that, but we also share that intelligence with our patrol officers that are actively working there. So when we deploy to an area, we're not stopping every car. And unless there's a traffic violation, we have to enforce traffic law too. We have to keep the streets safe where people aren't running red lights and stop signs and speeding and things like that. But we are there to try to affect the crime rate of whatever specific crime top it is in that neighborhood. And so that's why we really try to narrow our approach as much as we can and really look for the people that are involved in that crime top.
Thank you. I think we have time for another question. Dr. Sumner. Yeah, if you'll push it down and keep it, hold it down as you're talking.
Hello, I also wanted to ask, because maybe what I'm also hearing from Stephen is that there are other issues related to disproportionate access to resources. Was that also? So, and maybe that's a different topic, because I think the purpose of today's panel was to look at Asian hate related to a relationship with the police department. And I'm wondering if maybe part of what you're also asking is, how do we address the other issues that are systemic, that are also impacting members of the Asian Pacific American or Asian Pacific American community. I don't know if that's what I'm hearing in part of your statement. The resource allocation that's happening, and then some of the ways that policing is taking place, but there's also healthcare needs and other things that might be identified. And if I could say this to the chief, and it's not specific to a situation with an Asian American Pacific Islander, Desi Apida. I will say that we called the chief when we had a student that called our office about a situation that someone had come, police officers had come to their home multiple times. And the student was terrified, trying to figure out why the people had come to their home. Our staff member called the chief directly. He put one of his assistant chiefs on it. They did an investigation to determine they'd gone to the wrong complex, but they then called the student and had a conversation with them. So I know that there are instances when individuals have called the diversity office and said, we're terrified. They came and they're people of color. And I want folks to know that at the institution, we will take seriously when individuals call and say, help us. Because we have that kind of relationship. And lastly, I'll say, allyship is not performative, it is a lived experience. So it's not episodic, it is what you do all the time. So that's what they're doing, is living allyship. We have to continue to demonstrate value.
And as co-director of this program with Kirk Key and others, we were very intentional with allyship. And allyship is something that's very important to the Texas Tech School of Law in that sense of working and helping build these bridges. Because I'm going to be very honest, I don't think this would have happened maybe when I was a student in the 1990s, something like this. I don't think. And so I think that we have made significant progress and we can always do better. But perhaps that we could have another forum on access and support in other communities. But the fact that we can have this dialogue here today, I think is a testament to what we do. I would love to entertain more questions, but I know that it's past the hour. So I think we probably might want to continue the dialogue at some point. And I'm going to nominate Kirk. We'll continue. And I said, I'll be running around campus. And I think that that's, for me, as a woman of color, what I have learned. And again, I'll talk to you about my experience with my own husband. Very different worlds. He's 6'4", I'm 5'4", take my heels off. Very different worlds, very different families, very different everything. And he understands his privilege as a white male, and he empowers me each and every day. And I do that for him as a Marine veteran. He suffered significant PTSD, and then he graduated in 2015 and he didn't think he could do it, and he did. And he cried, and he's a big old dude. But we were here together as a community. We're here together as a Texas Tech familia. And I don't think I can tell you it wouldn't have happened, because I had that lived experience back in the 90s and with the progress that we've made. So we will continue. And Steve and I value our friendship, and I do welcome constructive criticism. So I would love to do coffee with you at some point so that we can talk further. Let's give it up for all of our panelists. And I also want to give a special shout out to Blake Groves. He's here in the back. We just love Blake. Everybody needs a Blake, let me tell you, he's wonderful. And also to Jonathan Caspel for initiating the community partnership. So thank you so very much to everyone. Thank you again.
Very nice to meet you.
I know. I will email you like when I'm not traveling.
I like your setup there with the questions in front of you.
Because we're doing like in the fall.